What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Thursday, December 5th, 2024. And we are here to break down Oregon's massive day one of the early signing period, aka National Signing Day. Dan Lanning and the Ducks ink an absolutely elite 2025 recruiting class, and they pulled off some pretty big flips along the way. So joining me to break it all down is ScoopDuck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Apparently I survived the earthquake of today that was buzzing on my phone, but otherwise I feel like I'm hungover, and I only had like 2 beers last night, so I'm not hungover. It was just because of yesterday's events and how wild it was and how exciting it was.
It was a long day, but it was also a blur of a day. I was up at 5 just to be ready and kind of get after all the big news. We know with how Oregon recruits nationally, a lot of these guys signed their letters and they were coming in early. And man, it was just a phenomenal day for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. And we're going to break down all of the events, all of the happenings here on the Ducks Dish podcast. But if you guys are just listening to us or checking us out for the first time, come and see us at ScoopDuck.com. We got a promo going right now. You can check us out for just $1. That is the Big Ten Championship promo as the Ducks get ready to face Penn State on Saturday night in Indianapolis. We'll have a pod talking a bit more about that game tomorrow. But Justin, let's dive right into this thing. I know we talked about maybe starting with Dallas Wilson, but the first letter that actually came in for Oregon, the first signature, was 4-star cornerback Brandon Finney. And that was one that I think came with a little bit of anticipation, maybe not as much as we would have expected a week and a half ago. But for Oregon to not claw their way back because he was always committed, but there was a time there where he had a pretty legitimate shot to flip to Penn State. So for the first letter to be from him, I think that's exactly how you wanted to start the day.
Yeah, it signifies strength to your class, right? I mean, there's a guy that, Penn State, Michigan, others did not give up on, and understandably so. I know that, and we'll get into it, but the defensive back class for Oregon is truly elite, like elite on any metric. I mean, whether it's on any metric, and the hidden gem of the group might be Brandon Finney. And, that's a guy that Oregon got on early on. He saw the significant rankings bump along the way. And obviously Oregon felt like that was justified because I know they prioritized him early on. So loved that was one of the ones out of the gate. I think you and I were pretty steadfast that last week or two, Oregon was going to be in great shape in terms of hanging on to him, but still it's a good sign of confidence. And you never know, it might've had some impact on some of the other guys later on.
I like what you said about the strength of the class and how him being the first letter, I think, showed that. So that was a tremendous get for the Ducks. I was a little bit surprised back in June when he committed to Oregon because it seemed like it was an official visit that came together a little bit on the last minute. And I remember talking to a source before that visit, and it was kind of like, yeah, we feel like we have a good shot here. And then he committed pretty much right after that trip. So just a little backstory there on the Maryland standout who had a tremendous senior season and will be joining Oregon for the 2025 season in Eugene. The other big development, the main development to get us started in the morning, Justin, happened also out on the East Coast, in the Southeast, in the Sunshine State, as Oregon was able to hang on to 5-star wide receiver Dallas Wilson out of the Tampa area. And this one, I guess you could say, almost didn't happen. There was a feeling that it may not go down as predictions were coming in from Steve Wiltfong, Chad Simmons, and others across other networks as well for the Florida Gators to ultimately flip Wilson from his 2-year-long pledge. But, I mean, I'll admit I got a little nervous when I saw those coming in, but I wrote in my last update before I went to bed on Tuesday night that I thought that Wilson was ultimately going to stick with Oregon. So huge recruiting win. Again, I guess you could say a second time around for Junior Adams and the Ducks. And they did it in pretty epic fashion as Wilson was in his gym at his high school, Tampa Bay Tech, and he pulled out the Hot Boys Oregon shirt I think with the other wide receivers on it, I couldn't quite see it very well on the stream, but I thought that was a pretty nice touch to say, hey, I'm inking with the Ducks and I'm going to stick it out.
Yeah, I mean, that was one that I think, for the most part, there was a little bit of concern a couple of weeks ago, knowing they were charging. Then it kind of died down. And then, ultimately, I know like midday to towards the end of the day, Tuesday, I kind of put it on the radar like, hey, there's some legitimate smoke here. I'm not saying he's flipping. I'm not saying he's not, but there's some smoke that you should at least have it on your radar. And so, I mean, obviously throughout the night, and it was one of the things I wrote about, like, hey, this stuff, whether it's Dallas Wilson or whatever, it's going to go throughout the night into the morning, right? I mean, it's going to be a bunch of back and forth. And yeah, I mean, I think you look at the relationships that Junior Adams and Dan Lanning, those guys built with Dallas Wilson, over the 2-year commitment. I would believe that that's probably what, held it together for him and the Ducks. No doubt, again, I've warned about this on numerous occasions. You're dealing with guys that are 3,000 miles away from home. It gets to those 48, 72 hours before they actually sign. And they're like, oh man, I'm going to be really far from home. I won't see mom for Thanksgiving. Like, it's just going to be a different deal. And things start to get weird. And so that happened here with Dallas Wilson. It's going to happen with the next guy. It's going to happen. And you just kind of have to see how Oregon can brace it. And obviously they did a great job and held on to Dallas.
We'll talk a bit more about just the overall wide receiver haul, Justin, because how can we not? But let's just put a little bit of context out there, I think, on Florida right now. Not the state, but the Gators. And they entered day one of the early signing period as one of the hottest teams in college football. And for me, my 2 cents on that is you're committing to Billy Napier for 2025. You have a couple of big wins. You have a big-time quarterback, young quarterback, in DJ Lagway that you're ultimately able to sell some of these wide receivers on. I know Florida, was making a push for Jamie French out of the state of Florida, committed to Texas, but he ultimately signed with the Longhorns. So I think for Florida, that's a major brand in college football. I know that they've been down the past couple of years, but it seems like Napier was able to steady the ship a little bit. A lot of people thought that they had the toughest schedule in all of college football this season. So for me, I think obviously doubling down on Napier, that probably came with a little bit of financial backing from some of your donors and high level people. But that's kind of what I made of Florida, just absolutely tearing it up going into day one of the early signing period.
Yeah, they had a good few weeks. And, ultimately they played it right. I think, they signified at a very good point that, hey, we're going to keep Billy Napier. He is going to be our coach next year. And I think what that allowed them to do is basically take potential money that they had either raised or had earmarked for a potential buyout, which they obviously didn't use because they kept him, and just moved it over to NIL. And it made them that much more aggressive on the trail. I tell you what, I know, you got to watch out for Florida. They've got a lot of young talent. They've got DJ Lagway. They did sign a really good recruiting class. Like, I think sticking with Billy Napier was the right call, and I think that could be a really good team for a couple years if they let some of this young talent develop. So they also won't have, and they did have a really tough schedule. They won't have that again next year, which would give them some chances to win games.
And Florida is such an interesting state to me, an interesting program to me, because there is so much talent in the state. And over the last couple of years, as Miami and then Florida State, more so last year, really kind of rose back to relevance, we saw Billy Napier battling with Mario Cristobal, the former Oregon head coach, with Mike Norvell, the Florida State head coach, for some of the state's top talent. So for Oregon to go in there when some of these other programs are a little bit more on the rise, I think says a lot about how far Oregon has come. And Dallas Wilson is really the face of the Florida movement for the Ducks right now. Of course, they also have Zaire Addison and Gavin Nix, who we'll talk about a little bit later on. But to kind of circle back to that wide receiver point, Justin, Decorium Moore, the number one wide receiver in the country, and then now Dallas Wilson, who the On3 industry has as the number 2 wide receiver in the country, are both heading to Eugene, along with an absolute stud in Arizona standout, Cooper Perry. So what a tremendous haul for Junior Adams, who quite frankly needed to bring in some receivers because obviously they're going to be without Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden next year. And it's no guarantee that Evan Stewart is going to be coming back, or Gary Bryant Jr. as well. So you really needed to bring in some more intriguing talent, some great talent. And I think a lot of people believe that DeCorian Moore is going to be pretty much ready to go day one. And I don't really think that Dallas Wilson's too far behind him.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're not going to sit here and anoint them as day one starters right at this point, but I think it's pretty clear you're bringing in both those guys to play. And, what does that look like? Does it mean they start? Does it mean they're off the bench? We don't know. Obviously, there's a lot of ways to go, but there's a reason that you push so hard for DeCorian Moore and Dallas Wilson and brought those guys in. Of course, you've got, J-Mac is on the roster and Pelham, and, there's some really good young receivers there. But like you said, you're going to see a lot of key production leaving the team. And now it's time to bring in as much talent as you can and let the cream rise to the top. So I have a really tough time believing that DeCorian Moore isn't a starter next year, but I guess we'll see. I hate anointing somebody in that fashion, but just with the way that kid looks, that's a Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith level signing is what it appears to be at this point, because that kid's absolutely special.
That's certainly the feeling that I get. And if you turn on the tape, it's hard not to have similar thoughts, but we know that Oregon's obviously going to have a competitive spring ball and fall camp. I think that both of those guys are probably expected to enroll early and take part in both of those. So we just got to see how things shake out there at the wide receiver spot. But it is a fun time to be watching Oregon's offense, as it is with their Oregon defense, when you're seeing some of these guys that Dan Lanning and the Ducks are slated to welcome here in the 2025 class. Justin, the other huge commitment that we have to talk about, I guess, Wilson wasn't a big commitment. He kind of doubled down, right? But the other big commitment that we have to talk about was a 5-star flip, as Oregon went to the islands, to the state of Hawaii, to flip 5-star Eva Beach James Campbell quarterback Jaraon Sagapolutele from the Cal Golden Bears in what was a pretty dramatic announcement. He didn't even tell Oregon before making his decision public. So the Ducks found out at the same time as you and I. I was able to interview him, and I'll get into some more of that. But just what a phenomenal ad for the Ducks on signing day, and what I kind of viewed as a bit of a shocker. I'll admit, I wrote going into signing day that I kind of thought he was leaning towards staying with Cal. That's what his camp was saying. But now the Ducks have another Elite 11 finalist, another 5-star quarterback heading to Eugene.
Yeah, I love this kid's moxie. Love that he's kind of the gunslinger, if you will, which is what he reminds me most of, like a Jeremiah Mazzoli more than anything. Just kind of the way he plays the game. Love me some Mazzoli, holy Mazzoli. No, what a pleasant surprise. Probably one of the bigger surprises in my mind. I think a lot of folks were really surprised about Na'eem Offord. And I'll be honest, I wasn't all that surprised at the end of the day that he ended up a Duck. Much more surprised that Sagapolutele was, because, like you said, communication in that, final 48-hour to 72-hour window really kind of dwindled. And I think Oregon had felt like, hey, this is not one we're going to win. Let's just continue planning moving forward. And then you get the call and you're like, oh, awesome. We're going to get another 5-star. Look at us go. And that just speaks volumes to the recruiting Oregon's doing. But, credit this young man. I think he probably had a lot of talks with family, obviously probably reflected through prayer or whatever works for him, and just ultimately, left this decision to himself instead of letting coaches sway him or any of that kind of stuff. So, love that he handled it that way. And you're never going to have to twist my arm to get excited about a quarterback from Hawaii coming to join the Ducks. So.
And yeah, the Ducks go back to the state of Hawaii to sign the state's #1 prospect. And it's cool because he told me that he models his game after Dylan Gabriel. So for him to be able to follow in those footsteps of Gabriel and Mariota as well, I think is a little bit of a cherry on top with this story. And I think that just on the surface, if you compare Cal and Oregon, knowing everything I do about this recruitment, it's just like, okay, come on, how can this not be Oregon? But the Ducks already had a quarterback committed heading to signing day with Achilles Smith Jr., who won the Silver Pigskin Award for the top player in San Diego. He signed with the Ducks as well to follow in his father's footsteps as a Duck legacy. So it's kind of an embarrassment of riches at quarterback for the Ducks, adding Sagapolutele, who went dark on both coaching staffs in the last 48 hours, like you mentioned there, Justin. So He's coming to Oregon with a mindset to compete and just do whatever he can. But I think he's also obviously open to learning, and I think he's got a great one to learn and compete with in Dante Moore.
Yeah, I don't. There's a lot of folks that continue to believe that the word developmental is a negative word when you're talking about a recruit, and it's not. Okay, there's just recruits that recruits are different, right? They're either more game ready, or they're maybe a high potential, high upside type recruit. There's different kinds of recruits, and I think you look at Akili Smith and you say, hey, look, this guy's not like totally unpolished. He's not. But you look at, okay, this kid's 6'6", 220 pounds, whatever he is. Like, there's a lot of really, really good tools to work with. Probably not the most day one ready college guy, but that doesn't mean he can't be a good quarterback in a year or two. And I think that's what you bring in. I'm not saying Sagapolutele is ready day one either. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying in regards to Keely Smith Jr., this is a great combination quarterback class for Oregon. I think you've got two different guys that have two different skill sets, and you're going to bring them in and say, hey, look, you might not be the starter your first year here, but come in here, get better, work on your craft, and let's see, where the dominoes fall after that. And so got to love that they did that. And I'm sure that the Smith family is incredibly excited to have another Duck in the family.
No doubt about it. And I know from interviewing KJ and speaking with his dad as a local guy down in San Diego, he's not afraid of the competition either. So it's going to be a very competitive quarterback room at Oregon. And Justin, there's one more guy that we have to talk about here, because there was another quarterback that the Ducks were able to add this week. And it's a little bit of a newer name that I honestly didn't know too much about until just recently here, but it's an in-state guy from the state of Oregon, Wilsonville quarterback Mark Weipert. He is going to be a walk-on at Oregon, a PWO, but this is a guy that can play, Justin. I mean, talking to people about him, I think this is a little bit of a luxury addition, honestly, for Oregon. He's pretty new to quarterback. He played it a little bit his freshman year, but his senior year this year at Wilsonville was really his first legitimate season as a starting quarterback. Is a guy that is incredibly gifted with baseball as well. He's a gifted baseball player, but he's a guy who played safety and linebacker before taking on the quarterback position. So I think I look at this edition and it's just like hey, why not add this guy? I think it's going to only make you better.
Yeah, this kid rips it. I mean, you can see the film. If you're on YouTube with us, you can see this kid just launches the football with ease. So, again, there are developmental guys at the recruiting level that you bring in understanding that. And that's very much one of these that I think for Oregon, hey, look, this, quote unquote, doesn't really cost us anything. Obviously coming in as a walk-on, and you've got a guy here that, hey, maybe he shakes out and he's a really good quarterback, and maybe it doesn't. Worst case is you took an in-state kid that'll probably play really hard for your program and be a great scout team guy. And who knows, those guys end up sometimes in that third, fourth year being, key parts of your team. So yeah, super excited that Oregon picked him up. And, if the highlights we're seeing are basically like the first year of him playing quarterback, then, I'd say there's a lot to work with here. So, good job by Oregon and the staff for uncovering what feels like another gem. Doesn't mean he's going to be a Heisman candidate, but it could still be a quality addition to this team.
That's exactly what I think too. It's a guy that could come in and work, and you never know. You could have a pretty nice college contributor on your roster at some point. So just a cool story too. I'll have an interview with Weipert up on ScoopDuck. In the future here, he had a lot of really good quotes just learning about his story. So the quarterback room in Eugene is as strong as ever following the National Signing Day, or first day of the early signing period. Before we get too much further, I want to give a quick shout out to one of our sponsors here on the Ducks Dish podcast. That is Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your dinner plans are, but head on over to Ranchito at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. They got great food, great service, and they will take care of you. Make sure you try the homemade tortillas. Can't leave that part out. And say what's up to my guy, Ruben, and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Back on the Ducks Dish podcast with my guy, Justin Hopkins of ScoopDuck on 3. We're breaking down Oregon's first day of the early signing period, a.k.a. National Signing Day. Justin, we already talked about one big flip that the Ducks were able to pull off. Now we got to talk about another one as they went all the way to the state of Alabama to flip 5-star plus Birmingham, Alabama, Parker cornerback Na'eem Offord away from the Ohio State Buckeyes in what was a dramatic finish, a dramatic flip in the 2025 class, one of the very best defensive backs in America. And this is one that I've been tracking for a while. I was speaking to a source Monday or Tuesday, and they were kind of indicating some optimism that this one could happen. And I ended up putting in my flip prediction for Na'eem Offord to make the change and come west to play for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. Might have been one of the longest commitment streams I've ever watched in my life.
Oh gosh.
But it was worth it because Na'eem Offord ended up committing to Oregon, and he had a dramatic video where Dan Lanning was saying, hey, it's time, Na'eem, come out and play for us. So I thought that was cool, a little bit of added theatrics, but my God, what a massive addition. This was the biggest flip, I think, of the day. I mean, aside from Sagapolutele, of course.
Yeah, I mean, a welcome addition, and I think that's one that, at least as far as ScoopDuck's concerned, we did a good job saying, hey, this one ain't over yet. And we were, there's no way I was predicting he was flipping, okay? I wasn't 2 or 3 weeks ago predicting a flip, but just saying, don't write him off just yet, okay? Oregon's still in this one, even though, all signs kind of pointed to Auburn. And then for a while there, it kind of pointed to him staying with Ohio State. And, if you're Oregon and you're going to pull off a flip or a surprise like this, that's exactly what you want. You want the heat on anybody else but you, if you can do that. So, that's the kind of misdirection that, I feel like Dan Lanning's, gotten really good at, and his staff and Marshall Malco. And, those guys did a great job to close on this one. Again, if you are looking at just what's made this Oregon class as a whole special is the quality, not the quantity, right? We're looking at the numbers, it's around 20, and they're all high caliber players. The quality of this class is unmatched by any Oregon class in history. And so you look at it, the defensive back group, including now obviously Na'eem Offord, it's pure quality. Like there's 5 guys there, but they're all high caliber guys that I feel like we're sitting here saying, hey, these guys are going to be on the field next year. Okay. In what capacity? We don't know. But Na'eem Offord's coming to Oregon. He's going to be on the field next year. Okay. Trey McNutt's coming to Oregon. He's going to be on the field next year. Brandon Finney, Dorian Brew, right down the line. Those guys are going to be on the field. So, I think that's something that we look at with this defensive back group. And I know when we talked about receivers a little bit ago, you're losing a lot of production at receiver. You're losing everybody at defensive back. You know what I mean? Like you're 5 guys that are more than likely gone from the season that are starting or, rotating heavily in for you. You need to get some dudes in there. And I know they signed a couple in the last couple classes, but this right here is what's going to make it where they don't have to totally rely on the transfer portal this year at defensive back.
And that's the secret sauce, right, Justin? It's making sure that you build your foundation from the high school ranks, and you go to the transfer portal to sprinkle the seasoning, if you will, on the dish, and kind of put those finishing touches on to bridge the gap. And in some cases, not even bridge the gap, just elevate your depth. We've seen Oregon do that before. Go to the portal for depth pieces, for lack of a better phrase. But Dan Lanning has a tremendous record with hitting on guys in the transfer portal, and those guys coming to Eugene to play significant roles for however long they're at Oregon. But yeah, tremendous addition with Na'eem Offord. I don't want to repeat too much of what you said, but it just shows where Oregon's at as a program and as a recruiting power nationally. They can go anywhere and get a guy. They've gotten guys out of Alabama before. Of course, Shaq McRoy is reportedly set to answer the transfer portal. He's an Alabama guy from the 2024 class, but I think going out to get a guy like Offord, that is one of the very best defensive backs in the country, has elite speed. I mean, you saw the track time that he has on display with some of these returns, and this is just a special talent. So I would kind of liken Oregon's involvement here to a little bit of what LSU did with DJ Pickett. When he was coming off the board in the summer, everybody, me and you included, were banging the drum for Oregon or for Miami. And then here comes LSU at the 11th hour, and he ends up a Tiger. So that's kind of how I saw this one unfold, Justin. But what a remarkable group for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. I think according to On3, they're at number 3 nationally, but first in the Big Ten with 21 verbal commitments. Everybody has signed here, so I don't really know what else you could ask for from a signing day. I guess you could ask for Lincoln Cure, who ended up sticking with his commitment to Kansas State. That was the only real quote unquote miss from the staff on signing day.
And that one was close. It was close. I mean, I know ended up at K-State. There's no bad wishes for me or any Duck fans, but I know Oregon missed. It's, you miss by an inch, you miss by a mile. They missed, but it was not that far off from happening, which would have been unreal. That would have been unreal. It was already unreal, but that would have it would have been crazy. So yeah. But as we know, Oregon's got a plan in place just at tight end as well, with Lincoln Kier staying at K-State.
Yeah, and I texted Kier a little bit after, and he was saying it was really close to Oregon. So I know we both had our predictions, but there's nothing guaranteed in the world of recruiting, and it's never been a better time than now to finish second place with the transfer portal. So who knows what happens down the road, but definitely wishing him all the best as he chooses to stay home, stay in his home state, and play for the Wildcats. Just what else is kind of on your mind here, Justin, as we kind of wind down a little bit? Any other commitments you want to talk about? We could talk a little bit at Gavin Nix if you wanted to, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I love the way they finished. Obviously, it became more of a flip effort, and I think a lot of fans have not yet figured out that we've got to embrace, that type of recruiting or that term, because it used to be like, oh man, you're relying on flips, you're desperate. Well, not now. Just because everybody commits so dang early in the process, flips are inevitable. Like it's inevitable that you're going to probably fill out the rest of your class with guys that are committed elsewhere. It's just the nature of the beast. And, obviously you picked up Gavin Nix, flipping him from Miami, and Mario Cristobal. I know Duck fans are absolutely elated at that one. I like that addition because I know we knew that Oregon wasn't going to sign a ton of linebackers in this class, right? It was going to be 1, maybe 2, somewhere in that range. It wasn't going to be any more than that. It depends on where you want to classify Nasir Wyatt, but I see this as a true linebacker and the only one that's a true linebacker. And what I like about this is it really rounds out that room. We know they landed 3 really good guys last year, but this feels like that true, Mike Thumper, 225, 230-pound guy. I know Braden Platt's a bigger guy, but this feels like that true, Mike linebacker style. And I think you have to have that. I know Dan Lanning likes his guys to be able to move around a little bit more. Gavin Nix is by no means slow, but I think it really rounds out that room. And if this is the only linebacker, again, depending on how you classify Wyatt, it's a really good one to get for sure.
And you're able to add Nix to a really talented trio from a year ago, right? You said Platt, Matudi, Dylan Williams, another one that they signed at a Long Beach Poly right out in my backyard. So I think looking into next year, you have guys like Devin Jackson and Jerry Mixon that look like they're going to be playing pretty consistently for you. And then you're able to add a guy like Nix, who I don't know if I'd say he's on track to play early. That's pretty tough to do as a linebacker, but I think it's a really talented guy that probably has a pretty high floor, seeing that he's coming from IMG, and a lot of those guys don't take too long to find the field, just historically when you look at kind of how they pan out in college. So this was a really fun flip for the Ducks, and it was a fun one to cover too because it came just before National Signing Day. I have an interview with full quotes from Nix over on ScoopDuck that I just posted this morning. And I thought the kind of cool detail that I can bring in here, Justin, I think we've talked about it before, maybe not on the pod, but you and I, is that when he came out for his official visit, he didn't have the best travel back. He went to Seattle, and there were some major delays. It sounded like there were some mechanical issues. So it was just a really rocky trip back to Florida, and I think that really kind of put the weight on him of how far he would be going to play his college football. And he said that kind of shook the family up a little bit, and he did end up coming back for an unofficial visit during the bye week, very low key, under the radar trip. But he kind of said that planes work sometimes and they don't work other times. So that was nothing against Oregon. And it was just kind of about following his heart and going where he felt best at. So massive win for B Mike and the Ducks here to grab a talented linebacker to almost close out the class.
Yeah, and the way they close out the class, like I said before we started talking about Knicks, was just the flips, right? Obviously, pulled two of Washington's best commits in the last little bit here, Zach Stikowski, Vander Plug a little while ago. So you took away from the Huskies. Just the flip efforts that Oregon made really paid off. And again, I know I've said this a lot. I will say it again. The roster management at Oregon is among the very best in the country. I mean, just the way that they attack prep recruiting and trying to fill in, areas where maybe they need more bodies or need depth, or, in the case of wide receiver, like, hey, we don't need to go sign 5 or 6 wide receivers in this class. We need 2 or 3 really good ones. Well, they ended up with 3 really good ones. Just a roster management composition. And now, the nice part is basically you enter the transfer portal recruiting, which we're not going to get into today, but it's about to happen and we'll talk about it soon. You enter that phase not in desperation mode, like, oh gosh, we got to make sure we go get 3 defensive backs, or you know what I mean? Because that you don't know the supply and the demand of the transfer portal. You don't know. There might be 2 offensive tackles that enter that are the caliber that you would bring on your team, and that's it. And if that's the case, everybody's going to spend for those 2 guys, and it's going to be really expensive. So just being able to have that flexibility, if you're Oregon, saying, hey, look, you know what, we didn't get Kier or Olesh, but we got, and I'm just projecting, but we got Plug, and now we need a tight end in the portal. We don't need 2, we just need 1, and it can be a guy that can come in and kind of complement everybody well. You're not, scrambling and digging and hoping that you can find a guy. So the roster management's great. Even just, we talked about it, picking up a guy like Weepert at quarterback, like that's, just you put him on the roster and let him see what happens. You and I didn't even talk about Toby Hastrip. That's a guy that's,
I don't know how I forgot about that, but that's just how big of a day it was.
No, and it's okay. It was like later in the day, and like all the magic had happened. And other than Kier, they had a phenomenal day, and they still had a phenomenal day. And then here we are talking about Toby Hastrip. It's like, well, we didn't sign any defensive linemen, but oh, by the way, we got this super athletic kid that's played a year of, high school football, and everybody wanted him after like 3 games, and we got him. So, just great roster management. I know Oregon, I think they finished at 3, like you said, right now. There could be some changes. There's still a few guys left on the board that Oregon will recruit into January. So,
sure.
McKay Madsen being one of them. Obviously, Olesh is a Friday decision. That's tomorrow. So we'll see what happens there. But they could slide back into 2. And then we know this. You and I know this. They're going to hit the transfer portal, and they're going to get at least a half dozen of the top names in there and have a top 5 transfer portal class to go along with this.
And the last thing I'll add here, Justin, before we get out of here, on your note of roster management, you can kind of break recruiting and roster management down into 3 different parts: high school, transfer portal, and retention. Yeah. So that's not even to say who could the Ducks potentially get to come back. Can they get Evan Stewart back for another year? Can they get Josh Connerly back for another year? Those are all parts of the equation that factor into how Lanning and Malco want to manage this roster and navigate the offseason. But for now, it's on to Saturday, heading to Indianapolis pretty soon as the Ducks get ready to face Penn State for the Big Ten championship in their first year, no less. So it's going to be a fun one, and Justin and I are here to have you guys covered every bit of the way. If you want to find more of Justin, you can follow him at JHopkinsSD. You can find me anywhere at Torres Sports. And don't forget, come and see us at ScoopDuck.com. Just $1 gets you 7 days. All of our coverage for National Signing Day, all the fallout, what's next, we got you covered. Remember to subscribe to the ScoopDuck On 3 YouTube channel and share the show. Share the Ducks Dish podcast with everybody you know, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.